He thought I'd be just another abandoned woman crying in the corner. But when I found that motel receipt, something inside me changed forever. Hello, my dears. I'm Eleanor Jenkins. I'm 75 years old, and today I'm going to tell you how my life turned upside down and how I managed to bounce back when I least expected it. But before I start this story that still makes my heart ache, I'd like to ask you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing there are people from all across America listening to my stories. Well, let's go back to 1969. I was 39 years old, had been married to Howard for 22 years, and we were what you might call a traditional family of that time. We had 4 children. Richard, the oldest, was 21, Margaret was 19, Robert was 16, and little Rachel was just 12. We lived in a comfortable house, not luxurious, but it was ours. Howard had a hardware store that supported the family, and I, like most women of my generation, took care of the home and children. Back then, we didn't have the conveniences we have today. Washing clothes was quite a chore. The washing machine we had was one of those old ones where you had to wring the clothes by hand afterward. And it was on one of those Monday afternoons, the day I set aside for washing heavier clothes, that my life changed forever. I was checking the pockets of Howard's suit jacket before washing it, as I always did. He was organized with these things and rarely left anything in his pockets. But that day, that fateful day, I found a carefully folded paper in the inner pocket. When I opened it, my heart froze. It was a receipt from the Sunset Motel dated the previous Friday, precisely the day Howard said he was going to a hardware convention in Cincinnati. My hands trembled so much that I had to sit on the edge of the bed. Along with the motel receipt, there was a receipt from a jewelry store showing the purchase of a pearl necklace. I had never received pearls from Howard in all those years of marriage. Suddenly, an entire lifetime of dedication and trust crumbled like a sandcastle. I remember at that moment I couldn't cry. It was as if something had frozen inside me. I put the receipts under my sewing box and continued washing the clothes as if nothing had happened. Rachel came home from school and asked if I was okay because I must have looked terrible. I said it was just fatigue. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay looking at the ceiling while Howard snored beside me, as if nothing was wrong in the world. How could he sleep so peacefully after betraying me? After lying while looking me in the eye? I thought about all the times in recent months he said he had to work late, all the conventions and business meetings that seemed to be increasing. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I wouldn't confront Howard immediately. That's what he would expect from me. An emotional explosion, tears, screams, the perfect script for him to say I was overreacting, that I was hysterical. No, I would be smarter. I decided to observe and gather more information before taking any action. During the following weeks, I started paying more attention. I noted in a little notebook hidden in my underwear drawer the times he left and arrived, the strange calls he received, and went away from me to answer. Once I called the store when he said he would be there, and the employee told me the boss had left hours ago. It wasn't hard to discover who she was. All it took was for me to go to the store on a day I said I was visiting my sister. I saw when Howard left for lunch and went straight to the pharmacy 2 blocks down. There she was, Diana, a woman of about 25, with long, straight hair, quite different from mine, which already had some gray strands that I religiously dyed every month. They didn't see me, but I saw them leaving together. The looks, his hand on her back as they got into a car that wasn't ours. It hurt like a stab wound. There was the woman who threatened to destroy my family, 20 years younger than me. What could I do against that? That night, I cried hidden in the bathroom for the first time, with the faucet running so no one would hear me. But when I came out, I had made a second decision. I would not be the victim in this story. I started doing something I had never done before, paying attention to Howard's business matters. He always left store papers at home, invoices, orders, receipts, things I had never been interested in before. My father always said that money matters were men's business, and I, foolishly, believed him. But now I needed to understand what was happening. That's how I discovered something even more shocking than the betrayal. Howard was diverting money from the store. Small amounts were going to a bank account I didn't know about. And worst of all, I found a document indicating he had put a plot of land we had bought together in someone else's name. I didn't need to be very smart to guess who it was. My brother-in-law Nelson, my sister's husband, worked as an accountant. One day while Howard was working late again, I went to Nelson's house with some of the documents I had found. I'll never forget the look of amazement on Nelson's face. "Eleanor, do you realize what's happening? He's setting things up to leave you with nothing." It was like a second bucket of cold water. The humiliation of betrayal wasn't enough. Howard was planning to leave me in poverty with 4 children to raise. The same man who 22 years ago had promised to love and respect me until death parted us. Nelson advised me to make copies of all the documents I could find and helped me understand what was happening. We discovered that Howard was even committing some tax irregularities in the company, probably to hide money from me when he asked for a divorce. For 3 months, I gathered evidence, documents, noted dates, amounts, conversations, kept everything in a folder hidden at my sister's house. Meanwhile, I continued to be the same wife as always. I prepared Howard's favorite meals, never questioned his schedule, smiled when he came home. He seemed relieved by my apparent naivety, which only increased my determination. The moment I both feared and awaited finally came on a Sunday night. The boys had gone out, only Rachel was at home, and she had already gone to bed. Howard came with that rehearsed conversation, saying we needed to talk, that things hadn't been good between us for a long time, that maybe it would be better if we went our separate ways. "Is it because of Diana from the pharmacy?" I asked calmly, watching the color drain from his face. He stammered, tried to deny it, but when he saw that I knew everything, he changed tactics. He said he didn't want to hurt me, that these things happen, that we weren't the same as before. And then he came with the proposal. We would sell the house. He would give me a good portion of the money, enough for me to rent a small apartment and restart my life. He would keep the store, of course, because he was the one who built the business. I listened in silence. When he finished, I went to the bedroom and came back with a folder. I placed it on the kitchen table and said only, "I think we have more to talk about, Howard." The look on his face when he opened that folder and saw all the documents, all the evidence of bank transfers, diversions, tax irregularities. Oh, my dears, if I could have taken a photograph of that moment and kept it forever. It was like watching a castle of lies collapse in slow motion. "What do you want?" he asked. After a long silence, "I want what's rightfully mine. Half of everything we built together over these 22 years, including the store. And I want you to leave the house today. You can go live with Diana since she's so special." He tried to argue, to shout, to accuse me of blackmail, but I held all the cards. If he didn't accept my terms, I would take all that evidence to the police, to suppliers, to customers. His reputation and business would be ruined, not to mention the possible legal consequences. That same night, Howard left the house with just 2 suitcases. The children were shocked when I told them the truth the next day. Richard, my oldest, wanted to go after his father to break his face, but I managed to calm him down. I said the best revenge wouldn't be through violence, but through success. And so began the most difficult and, at the same time, most rewarding chapter of my life. At 39, with 4 children and only a high school diploma, I suddenly found myself as co-owner of a hardware store, a business I barely understood how it worked. But as my grandmother always said, "Eleanor, you may not be the prettiest or the most educated, but God gave you a good head and an iron determination." It was time to prove she was right. And that's how, my dears, a simple motel receipt found by chance in a suit pocket completely changed the course of my life. But the story doesn't end here. This was just the beginning of my journey. If you want to know how I transformed that personal tragedy into the greatest opportunity of my life, and how Howard ended up paying a much higher price than he imagined, be sure to watch the next part of this story. Well, now I'll tell you what it was like to take over a hardware store without having the slightest idea how that business worked. Just imagine, it's 1969, a separated woman with 4 children, having to run a business in an environment completely dominated by men. If it's hard today, imagine back then. In the first week after Howard left home, I could barely sleep. I spent nights thinking, my God, what have I gotten myself into? There were moments when I wanted to go back, accept any agreement he proposed, just so I wouldn't have to face that unknown world. But then I would look at my children sleeping and knew I couldn't falter. On the first day I entered the store as an owner, I felt all eyes on me. There were 5 employees, all men. Mr. Anthony, who was the oldest and took care of the cash register, Judd and Mark, who served the customers, Sam, who was in the warehouse, and Peter, a young man who made the deliveries. None of them hid their surprise, and I must say, their distrust when they learned that I would be the new boss. "Mrs. Jenkins, are you really going to stay here?" asked Mr. Anthony, a gentleman of almost 60, who had worked with Howard since the store opened. "The work here is heavy, you know. You have to deal with suppliers, difficult customers, late deliveries." "Yes, I am, Mr. Anthony," I replied, trying to convey a confidence I was far from feeling. "And I'll need you to teach me everything you know." In the first weeks, I went through humiliations that still hurt to remember. Customers who came in and, seeing me, asked if the owner was around. Suppliers who refused to negotiate with me, saying they preferred to do business with men. And worst of all, many of Howard's old friends began to spread around town that the store would go bankrupt within months. "A woman doesn't have a head for business," they said. If they only knew how those words cut me like razors. There was one particularly difficult day when an old customer, owner of a construction company, came into the store and, upon learning that I was in charge, simply turned around, saying he would shop elsewhere. "I don't do business with women," he said in front of everyone. I went home devastated that day. I cried so much in the bathroom that my eyes were swollen. Margaret, my oldest daughter, noticed and asked me what was happening. That's when I made a decision. I would no longer hide anything from my children. They already knew about the betrayal, but not all the difficulties I was facing. I called all 4 of them into the living room and told them everything. The customers who were abandoning the store, the distrustful employees, the suppliers who didn't respect me. To my surprise, instead of being worried, they rallied around me. "Mom, I can help with deliveries after college," said Richard, who was studying engineering. "That way, you won't depend so much on Peter." "I can type," offered Margaret. "I can organize orders and invoices on weekends." Even Robert, at 16, offered to help with the inventory during school vacations. Only little Rachel stayed quiet, but later came to hug me and said, "You're the strongest mom in the world. Did you know that?" That moment changed everything. I realized I wasn't alone in this battle. I had 4 brave young people by my side, ready to fight with me, and that's how we started to draw up our plan to save the business. The first thing I did was sit down with Mr. Anthony and lay all my cards on the table. I told him I knew many doubted me, but that I was willing to learn everything about the business. I asked if he would stand by me on this journey. The old man looked at me for a long time before answering. "Mrs. Jenkins, I've been working with hardware for 35 years. I've seen many people come and go in this business, and I'll tell you something. What makes a business successful isn't whether the person is a man or a woman. It's dedication and honesty. If you have those 2, you can count on me." Those words were like a balm. Finally, someone who believed in me. From that day on, Mr. Anthony became my right hand and teacher. Every morning we arrived an hour before the store opened, and he patiently explained to me how each aspect of the business worked, the profit margins of different products, how to negotiate with suppliers, how to control inventory. Gradually, I discovered something interesting. About 40% of the customers who entered the store were women, wives sent by their husbands to buy some material, housewives doing small repairs, widows renovating their homes, and they all seemed out of place, intimidated by that masculine environment, exactly how I felt in meetings with suppliers. That's when I had an idea. Why not turn my supposed weakness into my greatest strength? If men didn't want to do business with me because I was a woman, I would focus on the female customers that nobody paid attention to. I began to make small changes to the store. First, I hired a female employee, Connie, to help with customer service. She had experience in sales and, more importantly, understood the discomfort many women felt when entering a hardware store. Then, we reorganized the store to make it more welcoming. We improved the lighting, organized the products better, put in some chairs for people to wait. But the most important change was in customer service. I instructed all employees to treat female customers with the same respect and attention they gave to men. No condescending explanations or unnecessary technical terms to impress. Just respect and clarity. Next, I had another idea that would completely change our business. I started offering small free courses on Saturdays, teaching basic notions of painting, changing faucets, small home repairs. Do it herself, we called it, in an era when there was only do it yourself aimed at men. On the first Saturday, only 3 women showed up, all friends of my sister, who came more out of solidarity. On the second, there were 8. On the third, 15. In 6 months, we had more than 30 women participating, and many of them became loyal customers. One story I'll never forget was that of Mrs. Carmen, a widow in her 60s who came to our second course. She had just lost her husband and was desperate because the kitchen faucet wouldn't stop dripping, and all the plumbers she called charged an absurd amount, taking advantage of her situation. We taught her how to change that simple faucet, sold her the parts at a fair price, and 2 weeks later, she came back radiant, telling us she had managed to do the job herself and saved money that, in her situation, made a big difference. "You gave me back my dignity, Mrs. Jenkins," she told me with tears in her eyes. "My husband always fixed everything at home. When he passed away, I thought I would be dependent on others forever. You showed me what I can learn, what I can do." Words like that are priceless. Every time a woman left our store feeling more capable, more independent, I felt I was on the right track, not only building a business, but transforming lives, including mine. Of course, not everything was smooth sailing. We had many financial difficulties in the first few months. Howard had left several debts that I only discovered later, and some suppliers began to pressure me for payment. There was a particularly difficult month when I had to sell my wedding jewelry to pay the employees. And as if the financial problems weren't enough, I still had to deal with the malicious rumors Howard was spreading around town. He told everyone I had stolen his store, that I knew nothing about business, that I was running everything into bankruptcy. It hurt to hear these things, especially when they reached my children's ears. But you know what's interesting about lies? They have short legs. While Howard talked, I worked. While he spread rumors, I built a solid reputation among customers. And that's how, working from sunrise to sunset, learning from mistakes, leaning on my family and loyal employees like Mr. Anthony, we managed not only to survive that terrible first year, but to begin to prosper. By the end of 1970, something amazing happened. We closed the year with a profit. Small, it's true, but a profit many doubted we would achieve. We were able to give a modest Christmas bonus to the employees and even have a small celebration at the store. I remember looking around at that simple celebration, the employees, my children, some loyal customers who had become friends, and feeling genuine happiness for the first time since that fateful discovery of the motel receipt. But what I didn't know that festive night was that the biggest challenge was yet to come. Howard, seeing that the store hadn't gone bankrupt as he predicted, was preparing his final blow against me. And Diana, the young woman for whom he had traded me, would be a key piece in this plan that almost destroyed everything I had built with so much effort. Now I'll tell you about the most tense moment of this journey. When Howard tried to deliver his final blow to take away everything I had achieved with so much sweat, it was mid-1971. The store had been under my management for almost 2 years, and to the surprise of many, especially Howard, We not only remained open, but were beginning to see small growth. Our female clientele was increasing every month thanks to the do-it-herself courses and the respectful treatment we offered. One Tuesday morning, I was organizing the cash register when I saw an unfamiliar car stop in front of the store. Out of it came Howard, Diana, and a man in a suit who I later discovered was their lawyer. My heart raced. Since our separation, Howard rarely appeared at the store, and when he did, it was only to cause trouble. "Eleanor, we need to talk," he said in that arrogant tone I knew so well. "It's a serious matter. Can we use the office?" I took a deep breath, trying to hide the nervousness I felt. "Of course, Howard. Mr. Anthony, please take care of the store for a few minutes." In the small office at the back of the store, the four of us barely fit. Diana, now with an ostentatious engagement ring on her finger, avoided looking directly at me. The lawyer opened a folder and began to take out documents. "Mrs. Jenkins," he began in a formal tone, "I am here representing Mr. Howard Jenkins in a matter concerning the ownership of this store. We have documents that prove that the transfer of ownership was made under coercion and threats, constituting extortion. My client is willing to resolve this matter amicably, avoiding a legal process that would be unpleasant for everyone." I felt my blood freeze in my veins, not out of fear of the threats, but from realizing how low Howard could go. There he was, the man who had betrayed me, who had planned to leave me with nothing, now accusing me of extortion. And what would this amicable resolution be? I asked, keeping my voice as steady as possible. That's when Howard smiled in that way that always gave me chills. "It's simple, Eleanor. You sell me your part of the store for a fair value, let's say 30% of the market value. And we forget this whole story. Otherwise, we'll have to take this to court. And then, well, you know how these things are time-consuming and expensive." As he spoke, I noticed Diana nervously fidgeting with her purse, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. She looked thinner than I remembered, with deep dark circles. Something told me that life with Howard wasn't the fairy tale she had imagined. "And if I refuse?" I asked directly. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I have statements here from 3 suppliers stating that you used confidential information to harm Mr. Jenkins's business. This, added to threats of public exposure, constitutes a crime." At that moment, I understood the plan. Howard had bought the testimony of some suppliers, probably those with whom he had shady dealings. It was their word against mine. And in a small town in 1971, who would believe a separated woman against established businessmen? "How long do I have to decide?" I asked, trying to buy time. "1 week," replied the lawyer. "After this period, we will take the appropriate legal measures." After they left, I collapsed in the chair. I felt as if all the air had been sucked from my lungs. Everything I had built with so much sacrifice over the last 2 years was threatened. Mr. Anthony entered the office concerned about my expression. "Mrs. Jenkins, is everything okay? What did those 3 want?" I told him about the threat. The old man listened in silence, scratching his graying chin. "Mrs. Jenkins, do you remember that cement supplier Jimmy from JM Materials? Well, he told me last week that Howard tried to convince him to sign a paper saying that you had done something or other. He even offered money, but Jimmy refused, said he wasn't going to dirty his name because of a couple's fight." That information was like a ray of hope. If Howard was trying to buy testimonies, it was because his case wasn't as solid as he wanted it to appear. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked around the house, thinking of alternatives. I could sell my share to Howard and start from scratch, but how would I support my children with only 30% of the real value of the business? And after all we had been through, how could I simply give up? The next morning I made a decision. I would not yield to blackmail, but I needed help. I called my brother-in-law Nelson, the accountant who had helped me when I discovered Howard's irregularities. "Nelson, I need you to analyze these documents Howard is using against me. I want to know if there's anything we can do." 2 nights later, Nelson appeared at my house with news that changed everything. "Eleanor, do you know why Howard is so desperate to get the store back now?" I discovered that he and that girl, Diana, are full of debts. He opened his own business with the money he managed to hide from you, an electrical supply distributor, but it's sinking. From what I heard, it was Diana's idea. She convinced him to invest all the capital in that field she knew nothing about. That explained a lot, including Diana's tired appearance. But Nelson had more information. And there's another thing. Remember those tax irregularities we discovered in the store before the separation? Well, it seems Howard continued with the same practices in the new business, only now on a larger scale. If the IRS investigates, he's toast. It was as if a light bulb went on in my head. Howard wasn't just after the store. He needed to erase the traces of the irregularities he had committed when he was the owner. If I sold my share now, he could alter the accounting books, hide the evidence, and perhaps even use the store to launder money from the other failed business. Nelson, what happens if I take this information to the IRS? My brother-in-law adjusted his glasses thoughtfully. Well, they would probably open an investigation. If they found enough evidence, Howard would answer for tax evasion. But Eleanor, are you sure? This could end up splashing back on you too, since you were his wife at the time. I spent the next few days tormented by this decision. I didn't want to create more problems, but I also couldn't allow Howard to take everything from me based on lies. That's when I had an idea that would change the course of this story. On the 6th day of the ultimatum, I called Howard. We need to talk. Just the two of us, no lawyers, no Diana. Come to the store after business hours. He arrived punctually with that air of anticipated victory. He probably thought I had given in to fear and would accept his unfair proposal. So, Eleanor, decided to be reasonable? I opened the desk drawer and placed an envelope on the table. Here is my counter-proposal, Howard. Inside the envelope were two things. First, copies of documents that proved the tax irregularities he had committed in previous years. Second, a new contract drafted by a lawyer Nelson had introduced me to. What is this? He asked, confused. This, Howard, is what will happen if you insist on this story of suing me. These documents go straight to the IRS, and there's no use trying to deny it because I have everything registered with a notary. I saw his face pale as he leafed through the copies. He knew I wasn't bluffing. And the contract? It's simple. You withdraw all accusations against me, sign a document acknowledging that the transfer of the store was legal and fair, and in return, I don't hand over this evidence to the authorities. Additionally, you transfer the other half of the store to my name. In compensation, I assume all the business debts and pay you a monthly pension for the next 2 years. Time enough for you to get back on your feet if you know how to manage your money better this time. Howard went from pale to red in seconds. Is this blackmail? No, Howard, it's negotiation. Blackmail is what you tried to do to me. The difference is that my evidence is real, not bought testimonies. He huffed, walked around the office, pounded on the table, called me every possible name, but in the end, when he realized I wouldn't give in, he ended up signing the contract. What could he do? If he refused, he would face not only public shame, but possibly even prison. 2 weeks later, Jenkins Hardware became New Era Hardware and was officially 100% mine. The debts I assumed were considerable, but with hard work and good management, I knew we would overcome them. It was a difficult period, I won't deny it. There were nights I would wake up in panic, wondering if I had done the right thing, if I would be able to honor all the financial commitments. But then I remembered my grandmother's words. Eleanor, you have a good head and an iron determination. It was time to prove this once again. The most surprising thing was what happened to Howard and Diana after this episode. With the money from the pension I paid, they tried to maintain the electrical supply business, but the debts were already too large. In less than 6 months, they had to close their doors. That's when I found out, through customers and mutual friends, that Diana had abandoned Howard. Apparently, when she realized there would be no more of the luxurious life he had promised, she simply packed her bags and disappeared. Some said she had returned to her hometown, others that she had found another man with more money. I never knew the truth, nor did I care to find out. As for Howard, he started drinking heavily after he lost everything. Once I crossed paths with him on the main street of town. He was haggard, with worn clothes, the lost look of someone who no longer has hope. For a moment, our eyes met. There was no anger there, just a profound defeat. I continued on my way without saying anything, with a mixture of pity and the strange sensation that justice, in its peculiar way, had been done. And that's how, my dears, I not only survived Howard's final blow, but transformed his last attempt to destroy me into the opportunity that completely freed me. The store was now entirely mine, without ghosts from the past, without threats hanging over my head, but the journey was far from over. The 70s brought new challenges, new opportunities, and, mainly, taught me that the timid and insecure woman I once was had been left in the past forever. New Era wasn't just the name of my store, it was the name of my life. The years following my victory over Howard were filled with hard work, but also great achievements. We were entering the decade of the 1970s, a time of economic growth in America. Our town was expanding. New constructions were appearing everywhere, and that meant more opportunities for our business. I remember perfectly the day when my son Richard, who had already graduated in engineering, came home with an idea that would forever change our destiny. "Mom, have you thought about expanding? They're building a new neighborhood in the south side of town. There's no hardware store over there yet." I confess my first instinct was to say no. We had already been through so many difficulties. We were finally up to date with our accounts. Why risk it? But there was something in my son's eyes, that youthful enthusiasm mixed with technical knowledge, that made me stop to consider. "And how would we do that, son? Opening a branch costs money, and you know we're still paying off the debts your father left." Richard already had everything planned. He had done a detailed study of the local market, analyzed costs, projected the return on investment, showed me graphs, spreadsheets, everything very well prepared. At that moment, I saw that my son was no longer the boy hurt by his father's betrayal. He was a competent businessman. "We could start small, Mom, rent a warehouse instead of buying, keep a reduced inventory at the beginning, bring larger materials from the main store as orders come in, and I can take care of this branch. I've already talked to Robert. He's willing to take on more responsibilities here at the main store so you can divide yourself between the two places." Robert, my second son, had just finished his accounting course and was already taking care of the store's finances. Margaret, my oldest daughter, worked as a teacher, but on weekends she helped with the administrative part. And little Rachel, who wasn't so little anymore, was studying architecture and brought fresh ideas about how to organize the store in a more attractive way for customers. I realized at that moment that it was no longer just my struggle. It was a family business, something we were building together. After a week of thinking, consulting with Mr. Anthony, who continued to be my right hand, and doing more calculations, I made the decision. We would open the branch. The following months were double the work. We found a warehouse in good condition in the new neighborhood. I negotiated a rental with an option for future purchase, and we began renovations to transform it into the second unit of New Era hardware. Richard took on the task with such commitment that I often had to remind him to go home and rest. The inauguration of the branch was in March 1974. We had a small party with soda and snacks for the customers. Nothing too extravagant. I was never one to show off. But there was an immense pride in my chest when I cut the ribbon at the entrance of the store alongside my 4 children. 5 years earlier, I was a betrayed and desperate housewife. Now, I was a businesswoman with 2 stores. What we didn't know that festive day was that, not far away, Howard was observing everything from inside his old car. A customer saw him and told me later. She said he stayed there parked for almost an hour, just watching before leaving, head down. Howard's life after our separation went in a downward spiral that, I confess, sometimes made me feel sorry for him. After Diana abandoned him, Taking what little money remained, he tried several small businesses, sold insurance, worked as a commercial representative, even tried to open a bar. Nothing worked out. His alcoholism, which was moderate before, became severe. He began to appear drunk in public places, causing embarrassing scenes. Our older children cut contact with him after he appeared drunk at Robert's graduation. Only Rachel, always soft-hearted, maintained some contact, occasionally visiting him in the small room he rented in the back of a boarding house. It was through her that I learned Howard was having health problems. Excessive alcohol consumption had affected his liver and he could barely work. He didn't have health insurance, depending on the public system for treatments. "Mom, he asked if you could help him. He doesn't even have money for medicine," Rachel said one night with teary eyes. That request caught me by surprise. After everything Howard had done, after how he tried to destroy me, now he was asking for my help. My first impulse was to refuse. Why should I help the man who betrayed me, who humiliated me, who tried to leave me in misery? But then I looked at Rachel, saw the compassion in her eyes, and remembered my own mother, who always said, "Eleanor, the best revenge isn't seeing the other person suffer, it's being happy despite them." The next day, I went to the bank and opened a savings account. I deposited a modest amount, sufficient to cover medicines and basic food for a few months, and gave the card to Rachel to give to her father. It wasn't much, but it was what I could and wanted to do at that moment. Tell him he doesn't need to thank me. I'm not doing this for him, but for you and your siblings, so that you know that in our family, we don't abandon people, even those who hurt us. While Howard's life sank, our business flourished. The second store was so successful that in 1976 we were able to buy the property instead of continuing to rent. In the same year, Robert suggested that we expand our stock to include more sophisticated finishing materials, imported ceramic tiles, better quality bathroom fixtures, metals for kitchen and bathroom. "Mom, there's a new public emerging in town, people with more money who want more luxurious homes, and they're going to buy these materials in the city because no one offers them here." Once again, I had to overcome my natural conservatism. Investing in more expensive products meant a higher risk. What if we didn't sell them? What if they stayed stuck in inventory? But I trusted my son's business acumen, who had inherited my sense of caution along with a more modern vision of business. The bet paid off. Soon, our store became a reference not only for small renovations and basic construction, but also for more ambitious projects. Architects in town began to bring their clients to see our distinctive products. And who led this luxury segment? My youngest, Rachel, who had a natural talent for understanding what the most demanding customers were looking for. In 1979, we took another important step. We bought a plot of land at the entrance to the town and built our third store, much larger than the previous ones. It was no longer just a hardware store, but a complete center with a product showroom, rooms for personalized service, and even a small auditorium where we continued to offer our do-it-yourself courses, now expanded to include topics such as decoration and small gardening projects. It was during this time that I received an unexpected phone call. It was a nurse from the public hospital. "Mrs. Jenkins, I'm calling at the request of Mr. Howard Jenkins. He's hospitalized here in serious condition and asked to speak with you." I hesitated. It had been almost 10 years since I had spoken directly to Howard. What could he want from me now? But something in the nurse's voice, maybe the urgency, maybe the compassion, made me accept. The public hospital was a sad place, with peeling walls and a strong smell of disinfectant. Howard was in a ward with 5 other patients, separated only by thin curtains. When I saw him, I could hardly recognize that thin, yellowish man with completely white hair. At 59, he looked 80. "Eleanor," he whispered when I approached the bed. "You came?" "I came, Howard. What is it?" He tried to adjust himself in the bed, moaning in pain with the effort. "The doctors say my liver is destroyed. I don't have much time." I didn't know what to say. Despite everything, he was the man with whom I had spent 22 years of my life, the the father of my children. I wanted to ask your forgiveness, he continued in a weak voice, for everything. For Diana, for the lies, for trying to take the store from you. I was a fool. I threw away the best thing I had in life, our family. I remained silent, absorbing those words that years before I would have given anything to hear. Now they seemed to come too late. You did it, Eleanor. You proved I was wrong. A woman could indeed run a business, and better than me. While I lost everything, you built an empire. It's not an empire, Howard. It's just 3 stores. For me, who has nothing, it seems like an empire. He smiled sadly. The boys came to see me yesterday, even Richard, who swore he would never speak to me again. I think they know it's the farewell. I stayed with him for another hour. We spoke little, but there was a strange peace in that silence. When I got up to leave, he held my hand. Thank you for the help you sent through Rachel. I knew it came from you, even though she never said so. You were always better than me, Eleanor. 3 days later, Howard died due to complications from liver cirrhosis. We held a simple funeral, attended by our children, some relatives, and the few friends who still maintained contact with him. As I watched the coffin being lowered into the ground, I thought about the irony of life. The man who once considered me disposable for being older, who traded me for a woman 20 years younger, was departing at 59, while I, at 49, was at the peak of my life, both personal and professional. I felt no joy at his death, just the realization that life has its own way of doing justice. The true revenge wasn't seeing Howard at rock bottom. It was rebuilding my life in such a successful way that his betrayal became just a chapter, not the end of my story. And that chapter was definitely closed. Now it was time to look ahead, to the 1980s, which were approaching, bringing new challenges and opportunities for the business and for me, who at 49 was ready to live the best phase of my life. With Howard's death in 1979, I felt that a cycle was definitely closing. The resentments I still harbored, even if unconsciously, were buried with him. It was as if a weight had been removed from my shoulders, allowing me to look to the future without the shadows of the past. We entered the 1980s with 3 stores running well and a team of almost 40 employees. My children were a fundamental part of the business. Richard took care of expansion and new projects. Robert managed the finances. Rachel commanded the finishing materials and design sector. And Margaret, who still maintained her work as a teacher, helped us with training and the educational part of the courses we offered. It was during this time that I began to think seriously about the future of the company. I was 50, had plenty of energy and many plans, but also the awareness that we needed to prepare for the times ahead. The United States was going through a turbulent economic period, with rising inflation and instability. How would we survive this? The answer came in an unexpected way. On a Sunday afternoon, during a family lunch, we were all gathered at my house, my 4 children, their spouses, who had already joined the family, and my first grandchildren. Between one conversation and another, Richard mentioned that a chain of hardware stores from the city was interested in opening a branch in our town. They would be strong competitors, Mom. They have capital, experience, negotiating power with suppliers. I was worried, of course. Competition had always existed, but a large chain could really affect our business. That's when Margaret, always the quietest and most observant of my children, made a suggestion that would change everything. What if, instead of competing with them, we became a chain too, not just here in town, but in the entire region? We looked at her in surprise. Expanding to other towns seemed too big a leap. Think about it, she continued. We have knowledge of the local market that they don't. We know the customs, the needs of the people here. If we open stores in neighboring towns before they do, we can create a strong regional network. That idea kept hammering in my head for days. It was risky, would require investment, more employees, more administrative complexity, but it was also an opportunity for growth that we had never considered before. After many family meetings, financial analyses, and market research, we decided to take the step. In 1982, we opened our first store outside our hometown, in a neighboring town that was in full growth due to a new shoe factory that had been established there. To my surprise, the repercussion was immediate and positive. Many people already knew our reputation and were happy not to have to travel to buy quality materials. The success of this first expansion gave us confidence to continue. In the following 3 years, we opened 2 more stores in other towns in the region. It was no longer the small New Era hardware. Now we were the New Era network, with a standardized logo, uniforms for employees, and a centralized management system that Robert developed with the help of a programmer. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. In 1986, there was the start of the Reagan administration's Reaganomics, the first of many attempts by the government to control the inflation that plagued the country. Suddenly, the interest rates skyrocketed, the dollar fluctuated, and we had to relearn how to do business in this new scenario. I remember the enormous lines in our stores, people desperate to buy materials before they ran out. The challenge of keeping the inventory stocked when many suppliers preferred to retain products rather than sell them. It was one of the most challenging periods for business, but also a time when our family unity made all the difference. While many competitors closed their doors, unable to navigate those turbulent waters, we adapted, diversified suppliers, and even started producing some basic items ourselves, such as mortar and grout, to be less dependent on third parties. In the midst of these professional challenges, something important happened in my personal life. During a hardware store owners' convention in Chicago in 1988, I met Arthur, a 62-year-old widower who owned a lumber yard in rural Kentucky. The meeting was casual. We were at the same table during a dinner gathering, but the conversation flowed so naturally that when we realized, we were the last ones in the restaurant. Arthur was different from any man I had known. Respectful, intelligent, without that chauvinism I was used to facing in the business environment. We exchanged phone numbers, and to my surprise, he called the next day, inviting me for a coffee before I returned to my town. For months we maintained contact by phone and letters. He would come to visit me every 2 or 3 months. He met my children, I met his family. It was a mature relationship without the pressures and expectations I had experienced in my youth. At 58, I felt like a teenager, experiencing true love for the first time. In 1990, after 2 years of long-distance dating, Arthur made me a request I never imagined I would hear again. "Eleanor, will you marry me?" I confess I hesitated. I had built an independent life. I was comfortable with my routine, with my space. Did I really need a husband at this stage of life? But the affection, companionship, and respect that Arthur offered me were different from anything I had ever experienced. We decided to do something uncommon for the time. We didn't officially marry, but began to live together, dividing our time between my town and his. It was a scandal for some, of course, a lady of my age, shacking up, as they said. But life was too short to care about what others thought. With Arthur by my side, I entered the 1990s with new energy. The New Era network continued to grow, now with 8 stores spread throughout the entire region. Richard, who had revealed himself to be a visionary in business, suggested we diversify our activities. "Mom, we already have the store network well established. What if we also entered the development business, building houses and small buildings using our own materials?" New Era Development was born in 1992 with a pilot project of 20 affordable homes in a growing neighborhood. It was an immediate success. The houses were sold before they were even completed. Other increasingly ambitious projects followed, always with the quality mark we had established over the years. In 1995, at 65, I made an important decision. I would pass the presidency of the group to Richard, although I would continue as the majority shareholder and chairman of the board. It was time to slow down, enjoy life more with Arthur, visit places I had always dreamed of seeing. Our first big trip was to Ireland, the land of my ancestors. I cried when I set foot on that soil, thinking of the journey that had taken me there, from the simple small-town girl to the businesswoman who could travel to discover her roots. Other trips followed: Italy, Spain, France. Each place filled me with enchantment and gratitude for the life I had managed to build. In 1997, something happened that filled me with pride. The regional business magazine elected me as Businesswoman of the Year. At the award ceremony, I looked at the audience and saw my 4 children, my now teenage grandchildren, Arthur with teary eyes, and dozens of employees who had grown with the company. I climbed onto the stage with trembling legs, and upon receiving the trophy, all I could say was, "This award isn't mine. It belongs to a woman who, at 39, found a motel receipt in her husband's pocket and, instead of letting herself be destroyed, decided to rebuild her life brick by brick." The ovation that followed still echoes in my ears when I remember that night. The 2000s arrived, bringing new challenges and joys. The New Era network continued to expand, now with 15 stores in 3 states. The development company had increasingly sophisticated projects, including our first luxury condominium. And in 2003, we launched the New Era Foundation, a social project to teach construction and crafts with recyclable materials to low-income women, a way to give back to a society that, despite prejudices, had allowed me to prosper. Arthur was my faithful companion for 18 years until a massive heart attack took him in 2006. It was a devastating loss, but the years by his side had taught me that true love enriches the soul in ways that remain even after physical departure. His children and grandchildren remained close to me, further expanding my already large family. Today, at 75, I look back with the serenity of someone who knows they have lived each phase of life intensely. The New Era network now has 27 stores in 5 states, managed by my children, grandchildren, and a team of competent executives. The development company has already built more than 50 projects, and the foundation has already trained more than 2,000 women, many of whom have opened their own businesses. I live in a comfortable home, but not luxurious. I was never one for ostentation. My greatest wealth is the people around me. 4 successful children, 11 grandchildren, and even 3 great-grandchildren who are the joy of my days. I continue to participate in the company's board more for pleasure than necessity, and dedicate a large part of my time to the foundation, sharing with other women the most valuable lesson I learned. It's never too late to start over. If you're going through a difficult time, if you feel betrayed, abandoned, underestimated, remember my story. The receipt I found that day could have been the end of my world, but I chose to transform it into the beginning of a new journey. And you can do that too. True victory isn't in seeing the other person fall, but in rising so high that the past becomes just a step on the ladder you built. That's the lesson I want to leave for you. Thank you for accompanying me on this journey of 5 decades told in a few minutes. If you liked my story, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share with someone who might need to hear that, even in the darkest moments, it's always possible to find a new dawn. And as I always ask, where are you watching from? Have you been through something similar? How did you overcome it? I really want to read your comments, and perhaps be inspired by your stories too. A big hug from this 75-year-old lady who learned that life truly begins when we decide to take the reins of our destiny.